It's an honor and a great personal pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening. The Ruggles Professor of Political Science and History at Columbia University, Ira Katznelson. Ira is a man of many and extraordinary talents. He has written subtle, sophisticated, historically informed books about race and urban life in America, about urban politics, about the dilemmas of liberalism, about how the social programs of the New Deal systematically excluded African Americans. He has done all this, and if you need him to, he can also be a politically astute and effective dean, as he was at the New School in the early 1990s, or he can be a splendid chair of any board, as he was for the Russell Sage Foundation from 1999 to 2002. He is also a spirited and feisty basketball player, but that's another story. When we on the board thought of who we wanted most to help us take stock after 100 years, to understand who we are, and where we are going, we all thought of Ira. He has been our chair, our colleague, and our friend for many years. It is a pleasure to give him the floor on this very special evening.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for that generous introduction, but I note that you said I was a feisty basketball player, but I didn't hear the word good. Now, this has been a very special day. The substantive discussion, the spirited give and take, the expressions of personal and intellectual affection, indeed, the astonishing gathering of talent, all speak to the uncommon position and achievements of this unique institution. That word, institution, is used very often today. It connotes many things, ranging from a simple rule or an implicit convention to large-scale, durable organizations like military forces, modern states, or the United Nations. Perhaps we should reserve the word, or at least some uses of it, to entities that last at least 100 years. For a century is longer than almost every lifetime. No one present at the creation is here today. And I note with a degree of melancholy, no one here this evening is likely to be present when the Foundation celebrates the close of its second century. But even so it goes. But even if at least some institutions have a temporal span greater than that achieved by persons, they are peopled by individuals who lead, who make choices, who shape discourse, who organize possibilities. So in honoring the history of Russell Sage, we are recognizing passionate and intelligent leadership and staff, devoted guardianship, and a social science community that sustains a remarkable and notable organization. The Russell Sage Foundation was formed by optimism and irony. We've heard a bit about the irony, because the irony, of course, was personal. Margaret Olivia Sage well understood that her late husband had not devoted his life to the improvement of social and living conditions. The optimism was progressive. The application of reason to philanthropy, the use of social statistics and social surveys, comprehensive approaches to regional planning and problems of poverty, housing, healthcare, and crime, and a close link between systematic research, professional social action, and elite influence shaped the early programs of the Foundation and guided those entrusted with its character. The date of the founding is significant. The decade before the First World War still was marked by the conceit, and I use the word assuredly and decisively, conceit, that systematic social knowledge based on dispassionate inquiry could tame the demons of unreason. The foundation was created at the very last moment when the Western world's intellectual and political leaders could share that expectation simply and openly. As the spirit of science spread from inquiry about biology and physical phenomena, the social sciences, newly organized in learned societies and university departments, were declaring themselves ready to probe beneath the surface of human relations as instruments for human improvement. A narrative of human progress, based in part on advancing social knowledge, gave the impression of being persuasive. It looked as if warfare had become more the exception than the rule. Global economic integration was proceeding. Imperialism, then in high flower, rhetorically promised a more equal future. Overall, liberal values seemed to grow stronger. Slavery had ended, and a battle against Jim Crow had visibly commenced with the founding of the Niagara Movement in 1905 by leading black intellectuals, including William Monroe Trotter, John Hope, and W.E.B. Du Bois. We all know what came next. The globe's most violent century, dark times, marked as much by the harnessing of reason for unreason as for taming unreason. The Foundation's 10 decades have been shaped by words unknown when Russell Sage began. Words that include total war, genocide, and totalitarianism. By instruments of destruction then unimagined, carpet bombing, the aircraft carrier, nuclear weapons, and shaped by patterns of mobilization that also could not have been anticipated, included the growing perversion of mass democracy by racist commitments and ideological zealotry, both secular and religious. But there also have been manifest successes based on reason tied to reform. Think of the growth of social protection, rising standards of health, nutrition, habitation, the growing plurality and integration of cultures, the defeat of many ugly political and imperial systems, and the full inclusion of all adults, women and men, blacks and whites, within the institutions of formal democratic citizenship. Each of these accomplishments marks an attainment that this foundation has tried to advance. But it is impossible to draw a balance sheet. All of humankind has experienced a vastly widened continuum of possibilities, ranging from exhilarated liberation based on enlightened knowledge, scientific progress, and enhanced capacity, to pervasive and permanent peril, and the understanding that all the reason in the world cannot erase or guarantee the control of unreason. As a result, our achievements are constituted by and are suffused with persistent danger and perpetual fear. Put differently, all of humankind has become emancipated on terms much like those that characterized the emancipation of Jews in the Western world in the period between the American and French revolutions of the late 18th century and the Russian Revolution of the 20th. Then, for the first time, despite widespread poverty and discrimination, Jewish residents were permitted to join modern political systems as citizens without being required to convert. Everywhere, they grasped the chance to embrace modern reason and modern knowledge while holding on, in the main, to a distinctive identity. Many in this room, certainly I, would not be here if not for this history. And yet, as we ruefully know, emancipation was accompanied by an intensification of hatred and by unprecedented hazards. Much as the spectrum widened for that group, with possibility at one end and destruction at the other, so it has broadened for everyone. In this sense, we are all emancipated Jews. Under these circumstances, some simply dismiss reason's claims as offering a mask for power and unreason, or as a manner of whimpering in the night. My own view, and that I believe of the Russell Sage Foundation, is that the widened spectrum of human possibilities and prospects not only constitutes our central challenge, but demands a renewal of committed reason. That is, reason and the production of social knowledge devoted to the best values of our patrimony, including pluralism, toleration, consent, and an equality of rights. If anything, we need social science more than ever, but not without self-consciousness about its boundaries and borderlands, a self-awareness greater than our founders ever would have thought necessary, especially attention to the wide zone where reason and unreason entwine. Nearly 4 decades ago, Fredrik Barth, the Norwegian anthropologist, argued in Ethnic Groups and Boundaries that the content of group life is not fixed or given. It is shaped by the location, character, and permeability of borders, understood as sites of connection and exchange, opportunity and danger. That is, by social processes that pivot on the meeting points of identification and differentiation between groups. His studies of ethnicity and culture insisted that cultural differences are fashioned at the margins, at points of contact, rather than being inherent. By looking at boundaries and the borderlands they designate, Barth argued, we better can understand how distinctive human and organizational cultures form and how their members make choices. In finding a place for sustained reason, the Russell Sage Foundation, like other comparable sites for the development of modern social knowledge, has lived from the start at the edge of other partially overlapping yet distinctive locations, borders that distinguish the foundation from traditional charity, from organized religion, from economic markets, and even from democratic politics. The foundation, like other institutions of enlightenment who belong to its extended family, found its earliest identity by making giving more scientific, less a matter of goodwill and moral obligation than of logic, theory, and analysis about how to effect desired change via the tools of modern social inquiry, rather than simply through belief or supposition. By secularizing values, the foundation put distance between itself and how organized religious organizations validated understanding and sought to ameliorate material and spiritual suffering. It also was unwilling to let outcomes be determined simply by market processes and patterns of distribution, wanting rather to regulate market behavior and countermand market-produced results. From the start, it also tried to affect the public sphere, less by engaging in the give and take of partisan politics than by altering conditions of understanding, especially understanding by networks of elites. These boundary setting and defining features have carried over from the early years of the foundation. They persist in the organizational culture we are celebrating. The foundation continues to seek answers to questions similar to those that vex charity, religion, markets, and democratic politics. Who is deserving? What larger structural sources of unequal chances should be treated as givens? Which, if any, foundations of truth underpin the search for knowledge? Is it possible to find sustainable equilibria of efficiency and equity? How is the content of the political agenda controlled? When is legitimacy accorded to policy possibilities that challenge power and partisanship? What is the scope of democracy? The ways these issues have been managed by the Foundation's leaders and participants have been motivated in the main by a steadfast fidelity to a more inclusive, liberal political system, and to the role reason can play in human affairs, whether in studies of poverty, inequality, labor markets, immigration, discrimination, and membership, or in supporting and developing theories, methods, and tools of inquiry, ranging from surveys of opinion to behavioral economics, to intensive case studies, to analytical historical narratives. The Foundation places these commitments at its core, and it is this quality that we rightly commemorate, for it offers not a whimper, but a beacon in the night. Still, 2007 is not 1907. A dark century and current dark times challenge us not to rest content with the assumptions of the past. Earlier today, Alice O'Connor dared us to ask social science for what? In her perceptive book by that title, she advocates an explicit return to the animating spirit of reform that characterized our founding generation. My emphasis, not contradictory but different, wants to direct attention to what has changed. That is, to how the passage of a century has thrown up a variety of once inconceivable, illiberal, and indecent alternatives, both outside our country and within it, thus putting in doubt our capacity to produce liberal social knowledge of depth and protective capacity. I should like us to focus more directly, more sharply, more critically on the predatory qualities of modern states, the challenge of might in a world of violence, the full range of disproportion and inequity generated by market capitalism, the propensity to close civil society and exclude others by non-rational criteria, and most broadly, the inherent powers not just of reason but of emotion. It is impossible to imagine how organized modern social knowledge can promote a decent liberal society without grappling with these ever-present features of modern times. Recently, I've been reading Alessandro Manzoni's text of 1829 called The Column of Infamy. He was a close friend of Verdi, best known for his poetry and fiction. Manzoni probed the brutal and judicially sanctioned torture and murder of two quite innocent individuals who were thought, in an atmosphere of panic, to have been responsible for the outbreak of the plague in Milan in 1630. There are things here, he wrote, that would be reckoned implausible in a novel, end quote. He began his study this way, and I quote, "The judges who at Milan in 1630 condemned to a horrible death certain persons accused of spreading the plague by methods no less stupid than disgusting, thought they were doing something so worthy of record that in the very sentence of condemnation, along with a clause ordering the destruction of their victims' houses, they decreed that in the space where these houses had stood, a pillar be erected, to be called the Column of Infamy, and on this pillar an inscription written, where all posterity might read of the crime which they had prevented and the punishment they had imposed." And they were right, Manzoni added, as, quote, "that judgment of theirs was indeed memorable." But how memorable? In part by the sheer drama and pain, which included false confessions under torture. But memorable, too, for the chastening lessons that were less about then and now, less about then and them, but now and us. An earlier consideration of the case, written in 1777 by Pietro Verri, served as Manzoni's polemical target. Verri had argued that the actors, including the judges, had been constrained by pre-modern unreason. Verri had ascribed evils, Manzoni wrote, merely to the ignorance prevalent in those times and to a barbarous legal system, and so had come to think of them as necessitated and inevitable. By extension, Pietro Verri believed that the introduction of modern reason would render impossible a recourse to torture, or to extorted confessions, or to mass hysteria of the kind that had accompanied the arrests, trial, and punishment in Milan. We know better, and so did Manzoni. His Storia della Colonna Infame wished to make 3 points. First, even within a pre-modern worldview, the judges had been perfectly capable of recognizing the innocence of the accused based on available facts and modes of thought. The contrast between modernity and times past too easily can be overdone. Second, he thus rejected simple views of cultural determination, as there was agency even within traditional constraints. Third, and most important, in showing how tradition did not erase human agency, Manzoni wished to demonstrate that the power of, quote, anger made pitiless by prolonged fear is not simply a matter of ignorant times past. To be sure, science later taught that the theory of contagion deployed in that case by the public and elites alike had simply been wrong. Learning was possible. But irremediable cruelty, he cautioned, cannot be relegated to history by the putative triumph of reason. Proponents of enlightenment, he counseled, should shed their self-congratulations. The Russell Sage Foundation was founded on assumptions about past and present, about the pre-modern and the modern, about superstition and reason, much like those that had guided Pietro Veri's account of 17th century Milan. But we have learned over the past century that our enlightenment, our liberalism, our modernity are too slack, too innocent, too vulnerable, unless they internalize the type of understanding and analysis offered in contrast by Alessandro Manzoni. From that vantage, our justifiable celebration, a celebration of a century of intellectual feats and social deeds, also poses a profound challenge to our self-understanding. What, in the spirit of Manzoni, might we now seek to accomplish? Over the course of 10 decades, one or more of the boundaries at the Foundation's edge have heated up as locations of dispute and uncertainty. Sometimes, perhaps now, they have come to be sites of contestation and doubt all at once, much as galloping horses have their legs off the ground simultaneously. At such critical junctures, it is particularly important for the Foundation to be both reflective and assertive about its specific goals and ways of working, and to be inventive about the big choices it must make concerning how next to proceed. Today, faced by the robust vigor shown by illiberal nostrums, radically heightened inequality, and passionate unreason, sometimes even married to just causes, the Foundation's vocation has become more difficult and more significant. With a fortitude marked by modesty and confidence, the ironic spirit of Margaret Olivia may yet help us revive the committed optimism of our founders. With the difference wrought by a century of realism and experience, however, we should continue her and their work in the hope that those who will celebrate a century hence will judge what we do favorably. Thank you very much.